first wool. I mean, there's dyers, there's people making a business out of yarn. You can't believe when you go to the conventions and the stitches, the shows, the Vogue knitting, stitches. They're just a lot of small businesses built around wool.
Lani Estill has built a good life and strong business around fine wool sheep on the California-Nevada border. Far from a one-woman enterprise, running 3,000 Rambouillet sheep across 500,000 acres of public and private lands involves Lani's family as well as contract herders. In this episode of Voices from the Field, which is part of our She's Raising Sheep series, Lani tells NCAT grazing specialist Linda Poole about her journey from raising sheep to teaching kids about wool to developing her successful wool business, Lani's Lana. Lani also details how an innovative partnership led by the nonprofit Fibershed brings together wool growers, climate scientists, fashion designers, and textile manufacturers to regenerate land and communities through the wild world of wool and shepherding. Let's listen.
Welcome, listeners, to another episode of ATTRA's podcast series called She's Raising Sheep. I'm Linda Poole, a grazing specialist with ATTRA and a shepherd in Montana. And today I'm so excited to welcome Lani Estill from California and Nevada. Lani's family raises Rambouillet sheep on a sprawling ranch that has both public and private lands on the borders of California and Nevada, the Surprise Valley in California and the Warner Mountains in Nevada. And this is beautiful country. It's dry. It's a hard place to make a living. And desert adapted sheep are a wonderful way to be able to have a product raised in harmony with nature. Lani also runs a fiber business called Lani's Lana, fine Rambouillet wool. And I've had the great opportunity to feel Lani's Lana as it's being processed, as we both take our wool, some of our wool, down to Mountain Meadow Wool in Buffalo, Wyoming. So that's actually how I first met Lani. And other than that, today is the first time I've talked with her. And Lani, welcome to the ATTRA podcast series.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here, and hopefully I can enlighten our listeners a little bit. And yeah, pleasure to be able to talk with you.
Yeah, well, I'd like to begin by just you telling us a little bit about your background. How did you come to be raising sheep and producing this lovely wool in the part of the world where you are now?
Well, my husband and I started with sheep in 1991, 92 down in Williams in the Central Valley, California, and Sacramento Valley, I guess, technically. And then when his father passed away and the ranch up here in Likely, California was turned over to him, we brought the sheep here, and then eventually bought the Bear Ranch in Surprise Valley and another sheep permit outside in Nevada, in the Nevada desert. So that was when we got to expand from one band of sheep up to 3 bands. So we run about 3,000 head of Rambouillet now. And that's been, really, along with the cattle, because my husband's background was in cattle, the sheep for me have been what's I've really, really enjoyed, is working with the sheep and the wool in particular. But it really started in 92 with Ag in the Classroom, and we can explore that a little bit further if you want down the road.
Sure. I'd love to hear more about that. What is Ag in the Classroom, and how did that change your course?
I was representing the California cattle women on the Ag in the Classroom committee, and California has a really, really great program in Ag in the Classroom. And so, we raised cattle, we were starting with the sheep, and I just decided I wanted to be able to share with children wool and the process from the raw wool to a sweater, sheep to sweater, so to speak, and realized that I probably needed to learn how to do all that stuff. So that started me on my journey with fiber, and my goal at that point, and I had young children, very, very busy with everything we were doing. That journey just started with learning enough to tell kids about the process. So with a drop spindle and hand cards and, the basic bits, I started sharing with children. And then when we moved up to Surprise Valley, Cedarville area, I came across the Warner Mountain Weavers and Bonnie Chase, and she has been my mentor in all things wool related and just taught me everything. So now I spin, I weave, I knit, I am even learning to crochet. That's my latest, my latest endeavor. And yeah, so that's how we got started. And kind of my love of wool and fiber, the basics of that is in with Ag in the Classroom. And I love that program. It's still one of my favorite programs.
Yeah, I think it's a great program. And like you, I've done a little bit with ag in the schools here in Montana, and I taught kids how to spin. And there is something that is just almost magical about when little kids' hands hit wool and find that you just twist it and pull it and twist it and pull it and you can make stuff. It's really wonderful and a great introduction to agriculture. I wonder, Lani, about what how do you think about your role in agriculture now? I read elsewhere that you are an accountant by training and that you grew up in a family that had agriculture as part of it, and your evolving role with the Bear Ranch and your own line of wool. Kind of what do you consider your role and relationship with agriculture today?
Well, as an accountant by trade, I do kind of tend to constantly end up in the bookwork realm. And, that's okay. I understand it. It's easy for me. So if you want me to pay your bills and do your books, I do that.
Mm-hmm.
And it has to be done. I know it's a very important piece of the puzzle for all of us. So the administrative end of things still tends to land with me quite often. But really, to get that creative outlook, that when I had the opportunity to start a wool business, I just was thrilled. I mean, absolutely thrilled. My mentor in that was Rebecca Burgess with Fibershed, and she's just been a fantastic person to have in my life. So really, that in 2016, I think that relationship started. And and then to this day, I'm still working on this wool business and enjoying it. I can't tell you it's super profitable, but it doesn't lose money versus agriculture, which often loses money. So in that regard, it's fun. And then that just a creative outlet with wool, it just goes on and on and on.
Mm-hmm.
The things you can do with wool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned Rebecca Burgess and Fibershed, and I read that you are you're implementing a carbon farm plan and that your wool is being marketed as climate beneficial wool. Can you tell us some about that, please?
Absolutely. So my relationship with Rebecca started with a phone call, and she was doing a kind of a wool inventory in California, and my name was on a list. So she called me, and our cold call conversation ended up taking probably over an hour, at least 45 minutes. So we just connected, and as some people sometimes do, have become fast friends. She is an amazing person that I really admire and love to work with. So we started out just talking wool. We were talking about California-based supply chains, I guess would be the better term. And eventually that discussion evolved into carbon farming, which she was really excited about. I have a background with public lands ranching and a healthy fear/respect for the environmental community, who has not always been friendly to us. Mm-hmm. So this approach that Rebecca brought was great because I really, really want to do conservation work. My dad's he's a conservationist. We've got a background in doing projects, always want to do projects on the land to improve our land. And when Rebecca and the Carbon Cycle Institute, Dr. Jeff Creek, came with the request to do a carbon farm plan and just let's start doing some projects and just see where we can go with this, that resonated with me. I just love their positive way of looking at things and the ability to help draw down carbon and be part of the solution really, really appealed to me. Mm-hmm. And so that's how we got started. It's been a fun journey.
Mm-hmm. So can you tell our listeners about some of the practices that you employ with your sheep? to, I mean, it's kind of flipping the old paradigm on its head. You know, the West, I have a background in wildlife, and sometimes when you're in wildlife classes, they tell you that sheep was they were the ruination of the West, range maggots, and everything would have been fine without sheep. And yet now we have Alan Savory and others talking about sheep saving the world. And really the difference is the management. Sheep can be for the good or for the bad. And so I'm really curious about the management practices that you're putting in place to be able to qualify as climate beneficial wool.
Yeah, sheep, I think, are great tools in grazing because you can herd them. Cattle can also be herded and used very positively with pasture rotation and management in that way. But sheep are unique that they can be herded. So you can take them without fences in various areas and keep them rotating and doing beneficial grazing without having them just camp in one pasture, which I think that's where you get into trouble, is when your cattle or sheep, your livestock, are just in one area and they can't be moved.
Mm-hmm.
So having the ability to do a range operation like we do, you keep those cattle or those sheep moving, and that helps graze that area. You hit them once, you might come back in the fall and hit it again, but not normally. It's usually a different pattern where you come back in the fall. So you don't get the overgrazing, but you do get the old feed taken off, and that helps with the new feed coming up. You've got bugs and all kinds of fun things happening when you have the manure in an area. Birds love that. You find the birds following the sheep. So that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing that we do, so that's the actual sheep, and we use the sheep for grazing in various ways, but we also do projects on the ranch. So we've done projects like compost production and application and shelter belt. We've got a shelter belt that we're babying along. It hasn't been super successful because it's right on the Nevada border and water's an issue. Keeping the water going has been a challenge. But working with a carbon farm plan, you're just constantly looking for projects and ways and things you can do to draw down carbon. So composting, riparian management and improvement. We've taken some land that we used to every year put in a new crop, and now that's halted and we have it in a permanent pasture situation. So just by not plowing it up every year and replanting, you're keeping that carbon in the soil. And that's hugely, hugely beneficial. And so then we just keep track of all those projects. And then with the help of Dr. Creek and the team at Fibershed, we use the Comet Farm Planner to track the benefits of the changes that we're making, the projects that we're doing, and do the technical end of it.
I love that. I love hearing how through your management that you're putting in place, you're producing wool that looks good, it feels good, but it also does good. You know, it's doing a lot of good for the land and helping us with the climate crisis that we are facing. And agriculture can be such a big part of the solution for that. I think another thing that intrigues me about your story, Lani, is how you've progressed in your relationship to the sheep flock. I understood that, you know, early on you were more hands-on and then you became a wool classer. And so I'd like to hear a little bit about that, but then moving from there to really focusing in on the fiber itself. And can you tell us a little bit about that part of the journey?
Yeah. My love for wool really does go back to when we first started, and my kids playing in the big old piles of wool, and the California wool growers had bought their first wool baler, and we had a team come out and they had a wool classer and we baled the wool, and it's like, oh my gosh, learning all about how to skirt wool and that I really enjoyed that. So it wasn't until probably 2017, I think, I took the wool classing school that they offered at Hopland and became a certified wool classer. And since then, since I understand it more and have spent lots and lots of hours with Ian McKinsey, who works for Roswell Wool, just learning more and more about the fine wools. I can't tell you that I'm a well-versed wool classer because my experience is mostly with fine wools, and I haven't traveled to go out and do other people's herds. So in that regard, I'm a little bit narrow, but I know a lot about my herd, my wool clip. And I know what it looks like year to year. And when we've had really bad droughts and lots of dust or problems with the sheep, like lice or something like that, you can see the health of the sheep in the wool.
Mm-hmm.
And then you need to make some changes if you see that. Thankfully, the last several years, we haven't had that problem, but oh my gosh, I'm just picturing one year that was terrible. So we can move on from that one.
Yeah, well, we all get to learn as we have sheep. They keep us humble and they give us a chance to learn a new lesson every day. And if we don't get it today, we'll get the lesson served up to us again tomorrow.
Right.
That's my experience. Well, I wonder if you could kind of walk us through the cycle of the year for your flock of sheep. When are you breeding? When are they lambing? Are you lambing on pasture and jugs and you're trailing up to the mountains? Can you kind of tell us how your year goes there with that flock?
Yep, it's about a 90-mile walk for the sheep, or a cycle. It's quite a trek. If we start with lambing, since that would be like right now, we are in really close to the border. We're actually in Nevada with most of our lambing when we're outside lambing. And we don't do it exactly the same every year, but 1 to 2 of the herds are lambed outside in April. And so when you're outside lambing, the ewes have their lambs and they stay back, and the dry bunches move forward, and then they're gathered up into a group of pairs later on, and the ones that are still lambing are out front. I guess it's a more natural way of lambing than the barn lambing and using the jugs and stuff, but it's a little bit, I don't know, there's more of a predator problem. So you really have to keep after the sheep because the coyotes are there watching just like you are. So the herd ends up being, and the lambs end up being healthier because they're not confined in with and eating alfalfa hay. They're still eating their range diet that they're used to. And we usually end up with healthier animals, but we have a higher death loss due to predators. So that's outside lambing. And then we barn lamb at least one band and sometimes 2 in the barn. And that's probably more typical for most, in that you've got them all in one bunch and you're bringing up the ones that are heavy, and moms and babies go into a jug to get to know each other. And then they're turned out into, a group of 5, and then a group of 10, and then a group of 100 as you go forward with them. And then eventually they get everybody lambed out and they go out on the range again. So that's our experience with lambing. And then after they're lambed out, we go up into the Warner Mountains, and that's on a BLM, and we have a Forest Service permit up there in the mountains. And their job is to raise big lambs. And then we bring them in August and wean the lambs off. We have one early bunch that usually weigh over 110 or so. And then the later ones that lamb in April, they'll be smaller lambs, around 90 pounds. So we'll separate the ewes from the lambs. Lambs will go on for processing, and our ewes are turned back out for another month. And then they come back down in September to October. They'll come down and be put on alfalfa stubble for a couple of months. And then, to finish the cycle, December 15, they go back out onto the range in Nevada after being in for a couple months. And they get bucked up at the time when they're inside on the alfalfa stubble. So then when they get turned out, they're pretty much dry bands of sheep, and they're back out on the desert by Gerlach, Nevada. And they stay out there until March 15, and then they come back, and we're back in our same cycle again.
I'm always curious about the mix of breeds, and it's a kind of a common practice with our Western fine wools to put in your top, if you're running white fine wools, you'll put in a white fine wool buck. to start with, and then a little later on you'll go with black-faced bucks and raise some crossbred smut-face lambs so that they grow a little faster. How are you guys handling that? Are you staying straight Rambouillet all the way through, or do you do any crossbreeding for?
No, we definitely crossbreed. I'd say the majority are Suffolk Camp bucks, but we do use the Rambouillets so that we can raise replacements.
Mhm.
And they definitely have a smaller lamb, but we need to have replacements continually. So you want to run those white bucks to keep your herd going that way.
Mhm. So your replacement ewes come out of your own flock. Where are you getting your rams? Are you raising any of those yourself, or are you buying those?
We buy the Rambouillets, and we've used Cunningham. We've used some others that we buy from the California ram sale. My son Cole's, he goes out and goes to the sales and stuff, and he's figured all that out. He's doing a good job. Some of the breeding that I started the kids with, and this is when they were kids, they're not anymore. We used to go to the Rafter 7 wool buck sale, which is very fine wool merino. They were done some great breeding and improved the quality of the wool. And was a joy of mine. I really enjoyed doing that. They are a smaller animal. So you can't have all that because you need a bigger lamb.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they definitely helped improve our wool quality when we started using the Rafter 7s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's always a conundrum with our white fine wools to think about how much am I going to breed for the wool and how much am I going to breed for the meat, because they converge not very much. They just it's like two different paths, and how do you make those decisions? So I'm always fascinated with that. I'm wondering too, since you're buying in new bucks and your ewes are out and on their big trek through the summer, and then they're being joined with the bucks down on the low country in December, you were saying, do you worry about quarantine or anything like that as you're bringing in new sheep, or as you're up against other people's sheep? Do you have any type of a health program or a quarantine program to deal with? That's a big long trek, and you also are bringing sheep in from other places.
Right. Well, we test the bucks, our own, for sure. And then if you buy anything, we have them tested for any disease.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a concern, of course, you would quarantine them. You wouldn't turn your bucks straight out in with the ewes. I mean, I don't know that we ever do that. But yeah, we have a veterinary program. My son Cole's in charge of the sheep now, and his wife's a veterinarian, so she's pretty with him there on making sure we have good herd health.
Wow, what a wonderful marriage.
Right?
Veterinarian along with a rancher, it couldn't be better than that. I'd like to shift a little now, Lani, and talk more about the wool end of your business. We've talked about how what your sheep are and what the course of a year is like, and yet you have really decided to focus on the wool end of your business. And I'd like you to tell us, how did you make that actual decision? What we have in our audience are a lot of people who are either new to agriculture, or they're thinking of shifting from one enterprise to another. And we're always curious about how people make their decisions. Do you have an economic model or a decision-making model? Do you just sit quietly and think about it? These are big decisions, and I wonder how you make them.
I really wanted to do the wool and the yarn, and I started with the black wool because I could see that when the buyer came through and bought the clip, they only paid 25 cents compared to, at the time, it was over $1 for just over $1. We're not much over that now for the white wools, but it was significantly discounted, and I knew the black wools made absolutely fantastic yarn. And so Bonnie Chase and I started just sending a little 30 pounds of wool off and making comb top. And then we took all the black wool plus a little of the white and made yarn. That was the second year. The third year, I think I went from 30 pounds just dabbling to 100 pounds. And then the following year, I took probably 700 to 1,000 pounds to the mills and made yarn. And, so I was selling it all the time. So it's like, oh, maybe this can be more than a hobby. This looks kind of fun. And then with the help of FiberShed, I got to say, Rebecca was very key connecting me with some buyers. I got up enough nerve to buy the whole clip, which was just a hair over 25,000 pounds. And that was a minimum to get it into chargeurs for scouring. And, that's where you need to be. If you're going to make fine wool comb top, you have to get it into chargeurs. And 25,000 pounds is a lot. And we flirt with that amount. We're not a 30,000 pound operator. We're 25. So we flirt with that minimum quite a bit. But that first year, Rebecca was able to get me a contract with the North Face. And we did climate beneficial beanies and scarves. And the following year, we added a jacket. So that relationship with North Face went on until COVID. So until 2020, when they dropped the program. But that plus Brooklyn Tweed picked us up as their first Ranch One yarn. So I sold a lot of yarn to them. And then another home goods company called Koyuchi, they were a big buyer. So along with that, I started my own yarn line, and kind of my business plan was sell these larger lots at a low profit margin to brands, and then take what was left and process myself and turn that into a higher margin retail product of the yarns. Then eventually, working with FiberShed, we did a climate beneficial fabric, which was woven in California. So I'm still playing with my fabric. It's one of my best selling products is the fabric that we were able to make with that first climate beneficial wool program.
That's really interesting. I did a little Western Sayre rancher farmer study myself years ago, and it seemed to me, with my much smaller scale of fine wool sheep, that the closer I sold the wool to the back of the sheep, the better my profit margin was. And as I started adding processors and even going beyond just turning it into top and going to yarn, I didn't ever go to a fabric like you did. The farther I went, the more negative the financial outcome was. You say that it's your favorite product, the material that you're making. Is it also your most profitable?
I don't know. I would say probably not, just because I've sold a lot at a lower margin, kind of as a community service to designers and stuff that are involved in our climate beneficial movement, and they want to make climate beneficial clothing. And so I let it go at a lower price point than I would like to designers. And so, I need to sell more at retail, but it's an expensive product. And so, you have to really know what you want to make to buy that fabric at, $80 to $100 a yard. But I've been pretty successful with it. People keep coming back and buying it. So.
Yeah, I haven't had it in my hands. I've just seen it on the internet, and it is beautiful. I love the way that you've used a combination of your colored and your white yarns and then over dyeing. Really, really lovely. It seems to me like you are starting to, with your process of here's the sheep and here's the wool clip, and now it's going to a wool mill and it's being spun, and now it's being made into fabric, and now it's going to designers. You start to bring a community into being built around your sheep. I think that's really inspiring to me. And especially when you think back to the start of it, where you are using these climate beneficial practices. And to me, there's like this social benefit. There's the environmental benefit by the way you're running the sheep, and then there's the social benefit by the way you're creating this community of people around the wool that you make. It's very inspiring to me. But most of us are not going to be able to have 3,000 head and a gorgeous ranch. So I'm wondering what you think about the path for smaller operations, maybe somebody who's just getting started. You know, this series, She's Raising Sheep, is going to be of interest to women who are thinking about maybe starting with a flock of sheep. What would you say to those type of people?
Well, we have developed, if you're in California, we've developed the climate beneficial wool pool now, and I actually sell my wool through that because I mentioned I was flirting with that 25,000 pound minimum. Well, a lot of years I couldn't make it, which means, okay, I don't have enough wool to go my own way. But by doing this wool pool, I can sell a smaller amount, and I can still follow that path. And maybe I am unique in this because I have a large amount, so might not work. But I can buy it back from that wool pool. Mm-hmm. So then I can buy climate beneficial wool comb top from the wool pool and go ahead and follow the supply chain on yarn. The other way it could be done is by using the smaller mills. It doesn't have to be chargeurs. There's lots of wonderful mills throughout the nation that make wool, make beautiful yarns. Mm-hmm. And so you mentioned earlier the Mountain Meadows wool mill. I use them with my colored yarn, the natural grays, because the big mills they only want white. Mm-hmm. So I utilize a small mill. And so any operation of any size can go into a Mountain Meadows or a Mendocino wool mill or a Valley Oak wool mill. They're out there and do a fantastic job. You do come out with a product that's priced at retail, so you can't wholesale it. That's the drawdown. But people, there's dyers, there's people making a business out of yarn. You can't believe when you go to the conventions and the stitches, the shows, the Vogue knitting, stitches. They're just a lot of small businesses built around wool. So you don't have to be big to do it. Absolutely not. But it's not going to be your only. It's not going to be your only thing either. I would venture to say you're probably going to have some other things going on in your life.
Yeah, I talked to another woman as I was working on this series, Denise Rackley from Indiana, and she said that in good years, of course it's profitable, but there's a lot of uncertainty, and so don't quit your day job.
Yeah,
there are some years that aren't so good, and I asked her again about the profitability of it, and is it enough to run on? And she said, well, if you look at it as being a very fine way to get some exercise and be outdoors and enjoy yourself and to make a little money at it, you can count on that. Yep. And yeah, I think that might be a lesson to a lot of us with sheep. I always think of shepherding as the best way to have a healthy profit is to not spend very much money.
Right. Absolutely. I still take in accounting jobs. This is not the only thing I do. And we have a store, we have a store in town. I have partners in the store, so I don't have to be there all the time. Bonnie Chase, it's her store. I get to play store with her. So yeah, don't quit your day job. I just don't think it's a super profitable. It's textiles. I don't know. Sad to say, it's a hard way to make a living.
Yeah, and I keep hoping that Rebecca Burgess's approach to this, as we're learning more about ecosystem services provided by well-managed agriculture, I'm hoping that there will be a way that we can make money in different ways from raising our sheep. When we're doing climate beneficial practices, that we would have help doing things like you've done, putting some compost on your alfalfa field so that they'll pick up in productivity, and then you'll be able to, graze more sheep on there and make a little bit more money that way. So I hope that someday that this turns into a more profitable business for people who try to do it. I'm always grateful for the women and for all shepherds who have toughed it out through the hard times and come out the other side. I wonder, Lani, do you have a story about a challenge that you met along the course of your life with sheep and how you got through it?
Okay, now she's put me on the spot. Oh gosh, I think that milling has been a challenge getting the supply chain. We've lost dyers, we've lost pieces of the supply chain. Of course, it was a huge disappointment when the North Face shut down their program. That was a disappointment.
Well, I think the fact that you continue to be a shepherd with all the experience that you have and the options that you have for different things that you're doing, that you're still connected to the Rambouillet fiber and making these beautiful yarns and having that move forward into beautiful fabrics. And before I forget, Lani, where can our listeners find your yarn and your website?
It's lanislana.com. So LANISLANA.com. And yeah, we're out there. You can find us also on the Fiber Shed Marketplace. We've got the things that fit the Fiber Shed definition for Northern California produced, and natural dyes can be found on that website. We've recently released some blankets, and that's my next thing when we get off the phone here, is to post the blankets on my website.
Ooh, those sound lovely.
Yeah, that's exciting. And I have a wonderful lady works for me, and she's making pillows out of our scrap fabric, so we're not leaving anything behind. So we've got wonderful pillows on the website as well.
Excellent. Well, I will look forward to seeing those. Whenever I have the chance to talk to somebody who's so fascinating like you, I'm always trying to think, what was the one question that I should have asked that I didn't, that would really bring home to the listeners who this person is, and what should I have asked you, Lani? What would you like to have the listeners hear as your parting information?
Just, if you're starting a business like this, I think we did say don't expect to make a whole lot of money, but it's a joy. And if you're bit by the fiber bug, just follow it, because it's so much fun. And there's so many wonderful, wonderful people involved in what we're doing. If you're wondering how to get started and you're in our area, the Warner Mountain Weavers, we are becoming a learning center for the northern part of the state, with affiliated with Fibershed, and we offer classes. We're trying to get more teachers to come up and teach for us. And if you're down in the Bay Area, they've also got a learning center down there with Fibershed, and you can do all things fiber and just enjoy it, because it's fun and it goes on. I mean, there's so many things to learn about fiber. You could just enjoy.
So what type of classes do you offer? I'm intrigued.
Are you intrigued? Our biggest one is a wool gathering that we do in the fall or late summer, early fall. And we do dye classes and spinning classes and some knitting, but generally those are more winter classes. We've done how to wash your fleece, some classing and shearing demonstrations. So that's a 4-day event, and that one's probably our most popular. But then throughout the year, we've tried to get in teachers to teach. So right now we're doing crochet twice a month. We have a sewing class scheduled for June, 1st of June, and that'll be a 2-day class. And then we're working on some dye classes and tapestry weaving. There's paper making even. We had a teacher contact us who said, "Oh, well, how about paper making?" And we're like, "Sure, let's do that." So, and knitting, of course, we have our knitting in our second Saturday spinning gatherings that we just get together and spin on once a month on Saturdays. So yeah, knit night, we're working on that one for this summer. We will do summer knit nights.
It just sounds like so much fun. I wish it was closer.
Right? It's a great community. And I know we're not alone in doing these kind of things, because there's groups of people that get together and do fiber throughout the nation. So plug into the right spots and you'll find it.
Yeah, well, I can't thank you enough for the wool that you help raise and the products that you bring forward so that we can have these beautiful knit nights and wonderful fabrics. I am hopeful that this will be something that gains a lot of momentum. The process of taking care of the land by taking care of your sheep and having that roll forward to take care of communities. I just think that there's a beauty to this that really can't be expressed very well. And it's such a welcome change from the bad news that we hear all the time when we turn on the radio. So thank you, Lani, for taking the time to talk with us and put together this podcast, something that will be hopeful and constructive when somebody turns on the radio. So thank you so much.
No, absolutely. Thanks for asking me. It was fun to participate.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. Additional information about this episode and related resources can be found at attra.ncat.org. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe to Voices from the Field wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Rich Myers. ATTRA, Voices from the Field, is produced by the National Center for Appropriate Technology, headquartered in Butte, Montana. It's supported by the USDA Rural Business Cooperative Service as part of NCAT's ATTRA Sustainable Agriculture program. Any opinions, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this recording are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of the USDA or NCAT. We'll catch you again next week, and until then, keep on farming.